I am doing well. How are you?
I'm not bad, not bad.
Happy
Taking
to
it
hear that.
in my stride.
And Felicia will not be here as well.
Okay. So who wants to support me in my note taking today?
Who wants to do what, sorry?
Support me in my note taking today.
I'm gonna designate Afo. Afo's leaving us, and he's gonna report to the people in Montreal how much I send him. So I might as well.
Okay, no problem. So thanks, Atho. Okay, let me share my screen. So how are you all doing today whilst I'm sharing? Can you enable me to share, please?
Yes.
Okay, can you just see my PowerPoint? Yes?
Yes.
All right. Okay, let me push you guys over here. 1 second. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Good, good, good. Pam, Afo, how are you all doing? Julie?
Doing good.
Yeah?
I'm good.
How's the summer? Has it been warm? Pam, are you in Calgary?
Yeah, I'm in Calgary.
Yeah. How have you all been coping with the heat wave? It's cooling down now. Chat here.
Just staying indoors.
Staying indoors. I know it's so funny. Some of my white friends are like, aren't you African? You should love the sun. I'm like, no, I like the sun with a bit of breeze. There is no breeze, just heat. And so, okay. So today we're going to be talking about positioning for research. And so, of course, I think everybody here, we've been through this this piece here, which is where we are present in the virtual space, we're open to new ideas, we listen deeply, we bring awareness, we hold space of trust and confidentiality, we focus on possibilities, we hold brave space for courageous conversations, we challenge ideas and not people. And so if anything that I'm saying at any point in time, of course, if you disagree with it, don't hesitate to chime in. If you have questions, don't hesitate to chime in. We challenge ideas and not people. And so for today, we're going to be looking at the following. Like, what do we want to talk about today? So first of all, what is research and why do we conduct research? How do we do research? Positioning for research, conducting interviews, credible sources of research, presenting and reporting on your findings. We're going to talk about your upcoming project. And we will also tackle this question. But it's interesting that a lot of the time when people hear about research, it's like, well, why do we need it? You know, like, isn't it just for academics? Like, why do we need to do research? Well, research is important because it's not just good in terms of developing ideas and thoughts, but it's often a precursor to social change. It's often a precursor to policy change. It's after a lot of research is being conducted, the recommendations that come out of that research that you get, okay, here's some policy change suggestions. Here's some change for social change. Sorry, some recommendations for social change. And so it's really important that as Black people, we know how to conduct research, how important it is, what is our research positionality, how we can go about it, and how we can essentially draw on the different things we've tackled already, from cultural capital, empowerment, et cetera, to be able to advocate for ourselves and be the best that we can be. So when we hear research, so let's jump right into it. When we hear research, what comes to mind? What comes to mind when you hear research? What is research? We have something in the chat. Hold on. Let me, oh, it's disappeared. Do you mind reading it? Okay, never mind, I found it. Okay, so what is research? Solving problems. Yeah, it's all about solving problems. Absolutely. Anybody else?
Answering questions.
Answering questions. Yeah, absolutely. So research is really defined as, let's say, the creation of new knowledge and or the use of existing knowledge in a new and creative way to create, let's say, new concepts and understandings. So you can either, let's say, doing something that no one has ever done. I don't think that, which is very, very few people in the world do that. And or you look at what exists out there already in terms of literature, in terms of what people already know, what people already understand, and putting it together in a creative way to generate new understandings so that you can use, let's say, what's happened in the United States, what's happened in England, and look at what's happening in Calgary and develop your research from that and come up with recommendations, okay? And I guess you've also answered the question on why do we do research? Because it really allows you to pursue your interests, to learn something new, to hone your problem solving skills and challenge yourself in new ways. So I'm really glad that one of you here, just a second. Ike, would you mind sending the link to Rita? Thank you. Yeah, so research really allows you to pursue your interests, to learn something new, to hone your problem solving skills and to challenge yourselves in 3 ways. There are 3 main reasons for doing, let's say, social research. Do you know what they are? Okay, you've already said solving problems, finding evidence. What else? Why? What are the main reasons for doing social research?
We don't know enough about it. Like, I don't know much about it.
You don't know enough about the topic, and so you want to find out more information. Correct?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Yep. To prove a hypothesis or theory. Yep, exactly. And so 1, you can say to explore. You may want to explore and better understand, let's say, the experiences of Black youth with regard to racism. How can you use, let's say, cultural capital to empower yourself for success? Or explore how you can use the knowledge developed from the program to ensure greater access to good quality and culturally appropriate mental health supports. Those are potential things you could explore. You may want to describe something. What is your experience of mental health challenges as a Black person? What is racism? Or you may want to explain something, which I think is similar to what Pam is talking about here in terms of proving a hypothesis or a theory. So there might be, I think this is close to I remember reading an article, and I think it says something along the lines of evidence suggests that 60% of Black people incarcerated are Black in Canada, but only 8% of the population is Black. So which is suggesting that Black people are overrepresented in prisons. You may want to look at, well, if that's the evidence, what does that mean? You may want to explain it and unpack it and be like, well, because different people will look at that in different ways, will explain that statistic in different ways. So what sort of explanations could you even attribute to that statistic to say, which is that 60% of Black people incarcerated, but only 8% of the population is Black? Why? How could you explain? Or what are the different explanations for that statistic? Well, how do you explain it? How do you explain it? What is that noise? Sounds like a road. Oh, okay. If you don't know how you would explain it, how do you think someone else may interpret that stat?
I just did a quick Google search here, and for Canada, it shows that it's actually 25% indigenous people, 7% for African Americans, 5% Asian, and then 54% for Caucasian.
Okay.
Now, I'm not sure how true, that's of 2019, how biased or whatever the fact may be, but that's just.
But how would you explain it? That you have such a huge, let's say, overrepresentation. Okay, let's use Indigenous one. Such a huge overrepresentation of Indigenous people, or even African Americans in statistics. How would you explain it?
I would explain it like there's two possible ways that you could go from the perspective of, well, for indigenous people, I would imagine it'd be because of the reserves. And if you do any research into those are not very pleasant places to live. They're usually pretty lots of poverty and not very safe places to live, lots of drug overdose and abuse, and lots of violence and things like that, things of that nature. So if you grow in an atmosphere such as that, you're more likely to commit crimes. That would be my first hypothesis.
Okay. Anybody else? Thank you, Jacob. Thank you. That's a good one. How else would you explain the overrepresentation of, let's say, Indigenous people or Black people in the prison system?
I think, first of all, Jacob, that's a really, really good point. I think for the Black population, I've heard that stat too in Ketty. I think that might be for Ontario, where there's a lesser Indigenous population, and Black people are like 8% of the population generally in Ontario.
Okay.
I think that's where
I think you might be right, because I know I read it somewhere a couple of months ago. Yeah, I think you might be right. Yeah.
And
explain it.
Sorry.
Carry on, Ike.
No. So just to say that, but it's a really interesting question, because when you look in the media, we say like, how do other people explain it? Like the media typically has a twofold answers. Like when I was coming up, it was typically you look at the community, you look at the culture, lack of leadership in the community, a lack of education. Those are the kind of things that we were told caused this. It wasn't typically things that we're hearing today, like cultural capacity or navigating systems or systemic racism. Those things are kind of like pretty new. But when I was coming up, it was pretty much look at other races that are doing well. I'll look at other immigrant groups that are doing well. So these ones that are doing poorly must be something internal, something you guys aren't doing properly.
Right, exactly. So basically the point of the purpose of asking that question and having that stat there is it's open to mass interpretation. And it really depends on one's worldview, your identity, your experience, and research and the results really depend on your identity, your position, etc. And this will determine how you conduct research, where you seek evidence from. It could be from academic journals, it could be from media. Are you seeking it from Fox News? Are you seeking it from CNN? And are you looking at, let's say, left-wing slash right-wing media? And depending on your worldview will really determine where you get your data information. And that then is going to impact the results. And the results will also potentially impact the solution and the types of intervention. And so racialized data is great if it's in the right hands. But of course, if it's not in the right hands, it could be highly problematic. Okay, so what is your understanding of qualitative data versus quantitative data or quantitative research?
I know that qualitative data is just based on word of mouth, or based on basically that's like how you answer social issues and stuff. But then quantitative data would be using numbers and facts, and using using numbers and I guess what you see.
Mm-hmm.
And then qualitative would be more like word of mouth, getting information from word of mouth, people's opinions and stuff like that.
Okay. Is that Jolie?
That was Juliet.
Yep. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah,
Zoe.
sorry, I have a mask on, so it's hard to hear me.
That's okay. That's okay. No, that's no problem at all. Yeah, that's a good one. So qualitative is really sort of text rich. It's really, rich on text, and quantitative focuses on numbers. So let's look at these two here when it comes to quantitative and qualitative. So one is based on opinions and experiences. There's a smaller sample. You can gather the data from interviews, focus groups. It involves in-depth analysis and comprises of, let's say, open-ended questions. And the other is based on numbers. There's a much larger sample. So you could be going from, let's say, a sample of 5 to maybe a sample of, 200, 3,000, whatever. It comprises of online, postal surveys, CATI surveys, don't need to worry about that. And here you're looking at the percentage of people agreed with a particular statement, and they're mostly closed questions. Which one of these two is qualitative? Which one of these two is qualitative? Yes, Jolie. The one on the left or right? Jolie, your hand up?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. I think it would be the left. So based on opinion and experience, interview focus groups, and open-ended questions.
Correct. Exactly. Thank you. And the other is quantitative. Which one do you guys like and why? Which one do you guys like?
For me, I believe the one based on numbers seems more logical than word of mouth, because you're not getting any bias. You're not getting any kind of those emotional feelings, especially when you're dealing with social issues or anything like that. You really just need to look at the facts. We don't need like these opinions or anything like that. Like that's where it gets tricky. And you have these strong emotions used into it, as opposed to just getting the facts and us being able to create our own opinions and thoughts and theories on it.
Okay. That's one perspective for sure. And it's also a very, very popular perspective, which is that you don't want any bias. You want to be on the outside looking in, and you want to use numbers. But anybody have a different view, Afo?
I think honestly, to me, the way it feels like a thing where a lot of times we kind of look at qualitative stuff and say it's not good, we shouldn't use it, but I think we need them both.
Okay.
I think any research we're doing, to a certain degree, we'll always need both of them, because even when you're looking at quantitative, it is still open for interpretation. We're talking about the overrepresentation of like Black people in prison. That is quantitative fully, but our interpretation of that is qualitative. Like you can't like just avoid the one or the other. They're both there.
Correct. And that's also another popular view, which is that you can employ mixed methods. In that quantitative research can only take you so far. It gives you the data, it gives you the stats, but it doesn't explain the why and the how. And so that's definitely another popular view. Anybody else?
I will go on the same note as Afo. It depends, because there are some topics and some research that you don't have to involve a bunch of numbers. Numbers will just come at the end to make it visually simple, make the research visually simple. Qualitative will mostly focusing on explaining fact or phenomenon that doesn't have to involve so much numbers. So it depends on the type of research you are undertaking. Both can help each other in certain way. You cannot depart from a research just writing theories from beginning to the end. There will be at some point the intervention of some numbers to make it simple and factual what you are talking about, and vice versa. So I mostly like the theories reading, because math, I'm not good with it, but both can help each other in some instances.
Okay, you're also correct. in that there are some pieces of research, there's some types of research that where you really want to understand the experience. So if you're wanting to understand the experience of a particular person or a particular group or a particular phenomenon, then in understanding that experience, the focus ought to be qualitative. But like I say, there is evidence to suggest, or there's a view that quantitative is the way to go. There's also a view that qualitative is the way to go, and there's a view that it's mixed methods is the way to go. As someone who has experience in both, you know, the economist part of me, I understand the importance of macro data. You know, you might look at things like inflation, unemployment, economic growth, income. Aggregate, sometimes you need those stats. You know, the government needs those stats in order to act. They need to know what's the unemployment rate in order to know, well, if the unemployment rate is above a certain amount, this is a type of intervention that is required. Here you want to know what is happening at the macro level. Medical research is also based a lot on numbers. You know, for example, when I go and visit my doctor and he says, and I'm like, doctor, my blood pressure is high. And she says, well, it's high for an average, but for Black people, it's actually okay because Black people tend to have elevated blood pressure rates. And so, but it often, like I said, doesn't tell you the why and how to fix it. But then as a community development person, I also see the value and importance in qualitative research. Yes, we know that unemployment rate is increasing, but now let's dig deep. Let's drill down. Who is it increasing for? Is it for Black people? Is it for Indigenous people? Why is it increasing? What are the barriers that these people are actually facing? Is it racism? Is it culture? Is it past trauma? Is it mental health? And therein comes that qualitative piece. And based on that, you can make recommendations to address those social issues, and recommendations can be made for nonprofit, for government, even for self, even for yourself. And this can influence how you demand or ask or advocate for change. You know, you might be pen pushers like Rita and I, where we do research and policy related stuff. I've been called a pen pusher because I don't feel comfortable protesting. I'm scared I'll get arrested. And then, you know, have others who are protesting, and, you know, it gives you, it influences how you ask for that change. And social research is doing that with the purpose of, oh, someone wants to say something? No, okay, that's fine. And so anyway, that takes me to researcher positionality. When you hear researcher positionality, what do you understand by that?
I would assume, just based on it, I don't actually know, but it sounds like someone's kind of position on the research.
Yeah.
Just based on depicting the word.
Yeah, and that's it. Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. When the term positionality both it describes an individual's worldview and the position that they adopt about a research task and its social and political context. And what about worldview? When you hear worldview, what comes to mind?
It's kind of like, I see like political ideology, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What would you say is your worldview, Afo?
I'm trying to think of like a good way to just encapsulate, and I'm like, it's kind of hard. I guess for the best I can like try to like sum it up is just treat your neighbor with kindness.
Okay. I like it. Treat your neighbor with kindness. Yeah. I mean, worldview is, just like you said, that is a collection of attitudes, values, stories, expectations about the world around us, which really informs our every thought, and that in turn informs and impacts our action. As such, our world views are developed from our experiences, our upbringing, our family dynamics, programs we watch, where we are located in the world. I mean, if I could explain or describe if I could describe what my worldview is, so I'd say I'm Sierra Leonean, British, and now Canadian. I've spent over a decade in all three cultures, so I would like to think, healthy uncomfortable mix of Western African views and culture, and I'm learning how to navigate through these three spheres. I understand the challenges of racism, but do not allow it to cripple me in my strive towards my goals. I keep pushing through. And I truly believe that I was put on this earth to support and empower people to unleash their potential. And I could go on and on and on, but that I would say is maybe at the crux of my worldview. Does anybody else want to tell me about their worldview?
I don't actually know if I could sum up my worldview because it would just differ on each social topic, really. I mean, I would agree in some things in more of a leftist perspective, and then I would agree more strongly towards a rightist perspective from a lot of other things. So I don't know if I could wrap it up in a...
That is your worldview. That is your worldview. That's it right there. Yeah. Anybody else? That is it. Oh, and Risa says you would use a worldview to explain the world and understand it and how you find your place in the world. Absolutely. So based on that, how would you describe your worldview? Anybody else?
My worldview is that change is possible, change happens. We should all be pursuing that in order to better ourselves. I think that growth is a constant. We should always be trying to learn, always be trying to replenish ourselves and fill ourselves. That's one way I view the world, I can say.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely.
Let me pick on somebody here. Mama Carol, are you back with us? She said she was eating before.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just finishing up my food.
My bad.
Are you done? We can come back to you later.
Yeah, I'll come back to you later.
Okay, okay. Enjoy your dinner.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go Pam, then Jolie.
Mine would be similar to Ike.
Mm.
I really go by trusting the process, or just let the chips fall where they may, because I'm a very religious person and I don't believe in like worrying too much, because everyone has a plan and God's timing is right. So I guess that's my worldview, is to just live in the moment.
Nice. I would love to learn a lot. I would love to learn to be more like that. I'm definitely a bit of a control freak, but no, that's great. That's great. Yeah. Thanks, Jolie. And I think Ike, said Pam next.
No, that was Pam. I think Jolie.
Oh, I'm sorry, Pam. I'm sorry, Pam. Sorry, I thought that was Jolie. Jolie, feel free to go next.
Okay. My worldview would be no one would be here if it wasn't for God. So living in a way that would, please God. So being kind to each other, helping your neighbors, and I value knowledge a lot, and integrity and hard work.
Okay. Okay. And
Was everyone able to hear me? Sorry, I think it might be cutting off because I have bad internet.
Yeah. You are all putting me to shame because you all have really great values. And I'm just like, go. So
I thought maybe I got everybody on the wrong track. Are you looking for a worldview in terms of like research or like a general?
Anything in
Gotcha.
general. Yes. No, thank you. Who else is outstanding? I think everybody's spoken. Okay, great.
We have Papa Ndembe who joined us.
Oh, Papa Ndembe.
Ashley's also there.
Oh, Ashley. Hey, Ashley.
Papa Ndembe, you had some...
Hi, sorry. Hey.
I think Papa Ndembe is still logging on.
Oh, he's still connecting.
Mm-hmm. Ashley, want to go?
Sure. Worldview, that's it's such a loaded thing, because I have to agree with Jacob. Like, I'm kind of all over the spectrum on certain issues, but I guess for me, I really value kindness. I know people have said that. I mean, just doing your best for others. And I mean, I think if everybody were to do that, regardless of race, creed, or age, anything else, that the world would be a whole lot better of a place.
Agreed. Agreed. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So So the individual's worldview, or where the researcher is coming from, concerns an individual's belief about the nature of social reality and what is knowable about the world. An individual's belief. So in looking at what is not knowable about the world, you look at, do they believe that there is just one truth, irrespective of context, or that there are many truths and truths are context bound? So if you remember, even earlier when Jacob was speaking, he says, stats, data, that's it, no bias, you should be on the outside looking in, no emotions, no feelings. That's an important component. And then I think it was Lavi who then said, Lavi and Afo, who said they saw the value in both, but Lavi said that there's some pieces of research where you're really not really concerned about stats at all. You really want to just better understand the experience. And so the second one here is, it's about an individual's belief about the nature of knowledge. Should knowledge be conducted in an objective or subjective manner? And it's about assumptions about human nature and agency. So it's about the individual's assumptions about the way we interact with our environment and the way we relate to it. And so now let's look at this stat again, okay? So it wasn't really put here to be 100% accurate, but more as an example that we can have throughout the presentation. So we say here, what do you believe is behind the 60% incarceration of Black people when they only account for 8% of the total population, let's say in Ontario? So I think we spoke about other people's views, but then why does this discrepancy in views or beliefs exist? Why do these discrepancies actually exist?
I see Afo's hand is up.
Afo, shoot.
I think really the discrepancy comes down to perspective. Because
Okay.
like for me, like when I see this is the stat, like when the more I think about, I'm like, it's a thing where I'm like, I'm gonna think there's gonna be a lot of issues. It's not gonna come. I don't think it would come down to just one particular reason. You can narrow it down to as to why that is the way it is. You're gonna have like, unless like your one reason is gonna be like a multitude of things working together.
Okay.
That's what it's gonna be to me.
Okay.
But like someone else might just look and say it's just try to find one reason, look for one reason, one cause. Be it just thinking if they're racist, may just think it's because we're more predisposed to causing violent crime, versus me, I'm gonna say some people are gonna be criminals, of course, and any race gonna have criminals there. You're gonna have like issues of other people's view on us, and how like the police would treat that, how like you don't have the benefit of the doubt in the criminal justice system, and even then how like it can be treated harsher, where like someone from a different ethnicity would get a much lighter sentencing than you would for the same exact crime, or even something worse than what you did. It's like I could see all those issues because like we're Black, so like we've seen these things happen and we notice them, but there's someone else, they might not always see them. They might not have that exposure to all of this. They're not going to see it. It's not going to see the trends that we can see.
Is there a example, just like, if there is one off the top of your head, where there was in Canada or in America, where there was like the same crime, same situation, and a African American or anyone of a different ethnicity got a harder sentence than a Caucasian person?
Absolutely.
Could you just
off the top of my head, comparing just two like particular cases, it's hard. But like one stuff that comes to my mind would be like what's the dude's name? I'm trying to remember his name even. Because all the shootings that happened, you get lost. But like a lot of like black people that got shot. I'm like trying to remember the one who was walking back home from a grocery store, but like a dude was there, saw him, like thought he was walking too fast, thought it was shady, followed him, called the cops, followed him. The cops said, "Don't follow him. We'll take care of it." He still did. The kid got like scared. He's like, "I'm getting followed," and like attacked him back. He's like, "I'm like in defense. I'm like, I'm getting followed."
Mm-hmm,
And and he got shot and died.
mm-hmm,
And the dude got off scot free for that.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like that's the case for me. I'm like, I'm Trayvon Martin. Thank you, Trayvon Martin.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the one. Like that's a case to me that will always like it comes to mind because I remember like
Was that a America or Canada?
that was
That
America. That was the
yeah,
U.S.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's like a case like that where I'm like, and I've seen more cases where I'm like, just not even just but like stuff like you have stuff like that will happen, and you get off scot free for that. But like when you're gonna see, and I can't list anything where someone like a person of color getting off scot free, for like someone black getting off scot free in a similar situation.
I think I think in response, sorry, I'm just jumping in. I think in response to Jacob's question, there are tons of examples. I think that it's hard, like Afo said, to do it like right now in this moment. But I think that if that's something that interests you, like I think me and Ike would be more than happy to kind of maybe provide you with some of that stuff. Like
I can give a quick example, actually. Even the incarceration, for example, when the U.S. decided to crack down on drugs and decided to give very harsh sentences for things like marijuana, whereas things like cocaine had lower sentences.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was really because a lot of the rules regulate, crack, for instance, and a lot of the rules regulating crack were crack was used mostly by Black people. Cocaine was used mostly by white people, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have someone who's caught with crack and is spending 25 years in jail, where someone is caught with cocaine and maybe spends 3 years in jail. And there's tons and tons of examples like that, Jacob.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, cool. Thank you.
What I'd advise for you to do, do you have Netflix?
Do I have Netflix, sorry?
Yes.
Yes.
Just check out 13th Amendment in the United States. It's an awesome documentary in terms of how the law actually made it permissible to be able to discriminate against Black people in the United States. So the 13th Amendment, I think, says something along the lines of, I think every individual is free except for those that are incarcerated. And so after the freedom of people who are enslaved, they then found a new way to enslave Black people by imprisoning them for little things. You stole an apple, you did this, you did that, you did the other. And then once they enslave them, then they can continue to work on once they imprison them, they can continue to work under slave-like conditions.
And was this was after the 13th Amendment, like kind of during the Jim Crow laws kind of thing, like that era, or are we talking more like past 20 years?
It continues to date. It
continues to date.
It continues to date. Whilst there has been some attempts at reformation, but it continues to date. And if you watch that, you will see that the level of incarceration of Black people has just spiked astronomically. Right. And just like Carol was saying, there was this distinction between crack and cocaine and, criminalizing crack, but not cocaine. And so people who are found with crack get harsher sentences and people who are found with cocaine get rehab.
And that's a really, if you want examples from the past 25 years, like that's a really good example. Like what Carol mentioned there, it's called a mandatory minimum sentencing. And there were 3 strike laws, and that was in response to the war on drugs in the United States. And then a lot of that work was even undone when marijuana was legalized. And so a lot of the people who were put in jail for the petty crimes were Black people for these crimes, and they were taken out. That's the a kind of US context. If you want the Canadian context, the same things happened here in Calgary. There was a Jamaican gang war, a Somali gang war, And so if you were Black, a lot of people were just stopped. If you're Black, even going to the club, you had to present copious amounts of IDs to get in. There's a gang unit that was present here in Alberta called the gang unit that went predominantly after Black people. So they were supposed to go after the Asian gangsters. If you see the statistics, Asians are underrepresented in the prison population. Though they commit some of the higher crimes there, they're underrepresented. Even with the statistics you brought out for Canada nationwide, those statistics show we're still 4% of the population, but 8% in the prison population. So still way more. And so when you see look up just that gang suppression unit from like here in Calgary, and the way they were stopping people, all the people caught up in that, that's where a lot of the pent up frustration comes from. And that's like local examples if you wanted those.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Cool.
Yeah, issues around carding is highly problematic in that, you know, you have Black people, especially young Black men, constantly being stopped by the police. And so if you want those examples, yeah, they are numerous. So if Ike and Ashley provide you some and you want more, reach out to us. We'll also get you some more.
For sure. Yeah, I'll do some deep research for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's a great question. And it's great that you are here, because I think we, I guess, take for granted that these things occur, but we're not necessarily aware of, let's say, how non-Black people are thinking or how they're feeling or what they're understanding out of the stats. And so it's great to have you here. So, yeah. And so based on these discrepancies that we are speaking about, and that you may have some people say, well, just like Afa was saying, there might be a view that, oh my goodness, if Black people are overrepresented in the prison systems, Indigenous people are overrepresented in the prison systems, they are all violent criminals. That's one view. And another view might be, well, there are issues around poverty, inequality, marginalization, et cetera, mental health challenges. Those are different views. And so what could be the implication of these differences to research and the results? If you are someone who thinks, okay, there's more of them in the prisons, it must be that they're violent. How are you going to conduct the research? What is your result going to look like? And what could be the implication?
It's a hard question, because that's the problem, right? I feel like sometimes people, the term that we kind of use in the house, like you fall in love with your own thesis, and then all you're doing is going out to prove your own thesis. And so like if I, obviously I'm don't believe this, but if I were to go out and prove that, you know, Black people are just more prone to committing violent crimes, I could do it. I could find evidence and whatever to support it, right? But I think that's where the problems start.
Correct. Absolutely. Okay. Anybody else would like to add to that question, or what Carol just said?
I would like to somewhat add my own. You know that saying, like, there's no such thing as bad dogs, there's only bad owners. I feel like that thing kind of goes towards parenting as well. Okay. Or not even parenting, but kind of, you know, young children are so impressionable. So, you know, it's so hard when there's, what's the divorce rate, like 52, something like that? Like, you got these kids now growing up, single parents, you know. I know a lot of my friends, they have single parents, they have so much time on their hands. Mom's not home, dad's not home. You can get into so much trouble, and, you know, like, it's so difficult for these young kids. That's where I think the most problem is once you get kind of caught up in it, like, how do you come back down without someone guiding you back in, and you get into drugs and get into all this stuff. And that would be a huge, in my opinion, whether you're white, Black, Asian, whatever, that would be my opinion for a majority of it, at least.
Okay. I mean, that's definitely a real issue that you bring up, because the unfortunate reality is that a lot of, let's say, families of color, and like you rightly said, even white families, where in which you have parents who are working 2-3 shifts a day, and then when the kids go home, there's nobody there. And so it's very easy for them to get involved with, let's say, the wrong type of people and get into all sorts of trouble because parents at work, they're trying to fend for the family. But the difference is that, let's say, if a white young person, let's say, was to be stopped by the police versus a black person stopped by the police, both of them doing nothing, it's more likely that the black person will get reprimanded for something or that they will be treated more harshly. And that's the unfortunate reality. But in terms of the issues, of course, the issues are the same, or they can be similar. But
would it depend on who the officer is? Like, you know, I know there is 1000% racist officers. I don't think anyone needs to question that, but there's also like decent humans. So is it like the system that's designed? Is it the actual person itself? Or is it just like coincidence? Like, you know, or is it all three together? Like what's kind of, you know, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, oh, someone wants to say something. Carol, was that you?
That was me, but you can go ahead and get you first.
No,
Okay. I was just gonna say that I think I think that, you know, the officer is gonna play a role, but it's like, you know, the kind of like that trickle down effect, and it starts at the top, you know, with the system. And when you already have these kind of policies in place, like Carol was talking about before about crack versus cocaine, that's the policy in place, so it trickles down. So it doesn't really matter anymore who the officer is. It's like the whole system is already biased against the black person, for example, or the indigenous person. To be honest, sorry, I don't want to go on a tangent, but that indigenous statistic, I just found out about it like 2-3 months ago, and it shocked me to my core. I had no idea that they were overrepresented to that level.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that's something that because I mean, what percentage of the population are they, like 8 or 5 even? And 25% of the prison population? I mean, that's so problematic. But anyway, sorry, I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but I think again it's just kind of like a trickle down thing. So yeah, the officer plays a role if you get a really nice officer, but there's things that are going to be out of his hands, right? Once it goes to court, once it goes to these other things, if the system is already biased. Sorry, my kids are yelling my name, so I'll leave it at that.
I just want to add on to what Ashley said. I'll give you an example, Jacob. So I have a coworker that I previously had, who a few years ago, this coworker, mind you, has indigenous blood in them, but they look completely white. When you first see them, they have very light eyes. You don't know that they have indigenous ancestry. But they were in some kind of legal situation. So when the police came to get this lady to arrest her, her husband is black. And what the police said was, one of the officers said to the other officers, yeah, hold that black man because you know how they're prone to violence. They weren't even coming to the house for him. He was never in trouble. He never had any issues with them. They came to get his spouse, right? Who for them is a white woman. And they had a bunch of police officers guard the husband because black men are prone to violence. That's a problem. That's a big problem. If you're coming into a situation and that's the thought process, well, black men are prone to violence. First of all, just having that frame is a problem itself.
Definitely. Yeah. What were they going to the house for? What was the call-in?
No. It was a case that had been going for some time.
Oh.
So it had been a case that had been going against his wife for some time, and it was just this was quite a few years ago. And so they came to pick her up because they now had the warrant and everything. So it wasn't anything violent. It was more like white collar crime.
Right.
Yeah, it was a white collar crime that she was being accused of. And so, but her husband was black, and officers asked the other officers to hold on to him, because black men are prone to violence.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they call for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally get you. And that ties into my point. Like, it also depends on who the officer is, which is really unfortunate, but that is the sad reality, right? Like you've got,
Absolutely. I mean, I'll give you
to give me a sec.
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to draw your attention to some 2 things I put in the chat for all of us. So one was, I think, Jordan, you were asking earlier about the differential sentencing that people get within the justice system. And so I kind of put in the chat, maybe if you have time, look at this whole thread called Criming While White. So that thread talks about how, white people say would be driving under the influence, and a non-white person would be driving under the influence, and they are treated very differently. And so it's a huge thing that's kind of going on to draw out these differences. So a thing like that would lead to the statistics that we are looking at. The other one that you talked about, and this is again for everybody, was around parenting. And mommy is not home, daddy is not home, and so kids have a lot of time on their hands. The reason mommy and daddy are not home is because they are trying to make a living, right? So really, they are scraping to get by. It reminded me of Ethan Couch or Ethan Coach. I don't know how to say the name very well, but he was 14 or 15 at the time his incident happened. He was driving a Ford F-150 in Texas. He was driving drunk with his friends in the car. He T-boned another car, killed 4 people. And his sentence was to go to a rehab place where it cost $500,000 a year. The defense he had, his defense lawyer said that he was suffering from affluenza. And affluenza means that his parents were so rich, he's never had to reckon with consequences. He doesn't have a very good view of right and wrong. His idea of accountability is twisted out of shape, so he cannot be held accountable for what happened. So he did not see a day in prison. He actually was sentenced to a place where they could treat his affluenza. The opposite question is, if you went to court and you say, my parents were so poor, I could not do anything, I ended up stealing a piece of pizza. Will that get you off the hook? I know it's an extreme example, but it is just to show how things can get twisted and interpreted within the legal system that gets the system and the odds stuck against particular people and not against other people. There was another guy who raped a girl so violently, and the judge cried on the stand when he was trying to sentence him. And the only reason he was crying is because the guy was a college athlete. He went to the same alma mater as him. And so he was saying that he didn't need his future to be disrupted by an act that was just guided by young, youthful hormones and stupidity and bad decision making. Now compare that to the number of other people that are in jail for raping someone. And sometimes it is just an assault, but in this, it was a very violent rape, like really violent rape. But then even the judge was openly on his side. That is what we are talking about when it comes to the overrepresentation. So then if you are coming at this with a positionality of justice is blind and you are doing your research, you wouldn't see anything wrong with these numbers. But if your positionality is critical, then you begin to see differences or have another explanation for unpacking the reasons we are seeing these numbers, even though those who are incarcerated are a smaller number of the population. And you can find that in the school system, you can find that in experiencing disadvantage in the healthcare system. It is all guided by some of these systemic issues. And that is why when we are having these kinds of conversations around research, we want to bring a critical lens to it so that when we see numbers, we take our time to unpack the numbers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're on fire, Jacob. I see your hand is up, but maybe can I just see if Jolie and Pam have something to add to this particular discussion here? Then we'll get you back in here, Jacob.
Yeah, so I took my.
Sounds good. Pam or Jolie, something to add to this discussion here. And by the way, welcome Papa Ndembe. I see you're connected now, so that's good. Either one of you have a comment? Oh, Jolie.
Yeah, I would just attribute all of this to obviously institutional racism and all the barriers that can affect this. So like housing, socioeconomic status could be a reason for that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jolie. Thank you. And I have one small example, and this is within the Calgary context that really looks at this issue around overrepresentation. So, of course, we know that when you don't pay your ticket on the train, you get a fine. And up until, let's say, 2016, you get your fine. Of course, if you don't pay, 150 becomes 250, 250 becomes 350, 350 becomes 500, 500 becomes however much, and it can go up and up and up and up. And if you imagine that someone who boarded the plane or entered the train didn't have 350 or $3 for the ticket, now has a $400 fine. How are they going to pay that? And so what ended up happening is that these fines kept on accumulating until it actually got into arrests and imprisonment. And it would cost thousands to go through that process of imprisonment, et cetera, for $400. And of course, which population was overrepresented? Can you take a guess? I think Caroline mouthed it.
Yeah, Indigenous.
Yeah, it's predominantly Black and Indigenous people. And so you tended to find that specifically Indigenous people were overrepresented because of the lack of paying a fine. So you end up with a criminal record because essentially you were poor and couldn't afford to get on the train. And so that was part of some of the work I did when I was at United Way, and that led to like the sliding scale, which you now have for have the low income pass, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a quintessential example of overrepresentation in the legal system that people of color or marginalized people actually face and experience. Okay, but let's move on really quickly because time is of the essence and I have a lot to cover. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And to add to what Rita has just put there, I didn't want to say because I wouldn't have time, but to add to what Rita has just put there, once you have that, you cannot get your insurance, you cannot renew your license. And so if you then manage to scrape and get your car and you get pulled over, you can't renew your license. Excuse my French, but you're pretty much screwed. And so it is that clustering of legal problems that, that small $3.50 ticket can lead to a plethora of other issues down the road. But of course that has now changed, but there are other things that continue to be an issue, even things like panhandling, which is what we will call begging. It's considered illegal to beg. You're like, well, how will you arrest me and fine me for panhandling? And obviously I'm panhandling and I kind of, you know what I'm saying. But moving on. So so positionality. Okay. And so positionality reflects the position that the researcher has chosen to adopt within a given research study, and it influences both how research is conducted, its outputs, its outcomes, and also its results. So let's look at the next thing. So let's look at this one. So let's say, this statistic that we've been looking at, two potential views, okay? One is that all men are violent. The other is that Black men are not a monolithic lump. And so there could be many reasons for this. It could be racism, mental health issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I feel like I missed a page. Yeah, no, et cetera, et cetera. And what could be their worldview? So it could be that Black people, the first view is that Black people, they see Black people in handcuffs and they're overrepresented in TV shows and are being called super predators. So this is what this view this person sees and they have no Black friends and no Black relations, and oftentimes they see Black people represented in TV shows, etc., then it makes sense that they will have the view that all Black men are violent. And then you have the other, which is that family members, they have family members who are entrepreneurs, academics, social workers, etc., and they're doing well, and they have no idea what a prison cell actually looks like. And that will make sense that they will have this view that they are not Black people or Black men are not a monolithic lump. And there could be many, many reasons as to why there's an overrepresentation in the prison systems. And let me just take a drink. Excuse me. And so for view 1, they have one truth. They think, someone wants to say something? Hello? Okay, never mind. Okay. So what stands out to you from these two views? I feel like we've probably spoken about this already, but if there's anybody that wants to add anything, what stands out to you from these two?
The first view is like a lot more quantitative, and the second one is a lot more qualitative.
Okay, expand.
Like the first one, you're just looking at the statistics, saying, well, they're overrepresented. They have like higher numbers, so therefore that just means that that's how they are. Versus the second one, you're looking at individuals, how they are, looking more like in depth of just how the people are.
Correct.
Compared to just looking at the numbers.
Correct. And so here, I've always just highlighted the point that I was going to go into in a few slides, which is that this view that this person has, this is what he thinks is the truth. And back to what Carol says, you have the hypothesis and you're really just looking for evidence to support what it is that you already believe. And that the first view here will really be looking for quantitative, whereas this one here, they're more concerned about qualitative, really looking at what is that reason. They're not just looking at the statistic, but they're really wanting to say, well, what is that reason? How can we unpack these numbers? And so, thank you, Afo. And so here, now we're looking at the next point, which is we're now looking for the reason for the statistic. We're looking for the relationship with the research. And here with view 1, one could say that it's objective, whereas view 2, it's subjective. And this here could be, I could relate it to the question, to the point that Jacob made earlier, which is that you don't want to get your feelings and your emotions involved. You just want to look at the data and let the data decide, and influence what your results are going to be. And that in turn will have implications for recommendations and policy, et cetera. Whereas this is subjective in that they really want to go in there. They really want to sort of immerse themselves within that research and really understand what is behind this statistic. And so view 1, completely objective in 2 ways. 1, his identity is detached from the Black experience. So he's able to do his research objectively. And so he can explore that view, theory, or thesis without even speaking to a living soul. And he can do that by just looking at the number of people that are incarcerated, let's say, for violent crimes. And then that there would support his hypotheses that all Black men are violent. Or even if it's not all Black men, or a high proportion of Black men incarcerated are violent. And then view 2 is subjective in 2 ways. His or her identity is attached to the Black experience. Family members and friends are doing great, and they have no idea what the inside of a prison cell looks like. And so the idea that all Black men are violent, to that person is just crazy. It's like, what are you talking about? You know, my aunt is a social worker, my uncle's a nurse, and, you know, we're doing great. We're not violent. We've never even been to a police station for anything. And so he or she can then bring empathy to their experience, but more importantly, may be able to reach the root cause and not just discuss the symptom of the problem, which could be, okay, the violence, okay? And And I think, and I've always, like I said, just moved on to the next point, which my next question was, what could the implication for the research methods be? So view one, definitely be quantitative. I mean, of course, you can take a qualitative look, but it would be quantitative. That would be the best way to prove his hypothesis, that his or her hypothesis there. And view two would be qualitative. And what do you see here? So I have this fish tank, and this person is on the outside looking in. And this fish tank, you have this person that is on the inside. What is your understanding here?
Well, with objective, it would mean just what you are seeing, and subjective data would be what people are telling you.
Okay. Anybody want to add to that? Thank you so much for that. Anybody want to add to that?
Maybe subjective, you're attempting to make yourself the item or the element of research. Like we can see the diver here is in the water with the fish versus an observer from the outside.
Correct. And what would the implications be for someone who's on the outside looking in versus someone that is inside experiencing what the fish is experiencing, you know, feeling and touching? I mean, of course they can't be a fish, but but the experience is different. Like, what would be the implications for the research, or what would be implication for the research for someone who's on the outside looking in versus someone who's inside and immersed and engrossed in the research?
The difference between the two is one is very, very lazy with no effort put into it whatsoever, no emotion. The other one at least has some truth, some like, I could say anything. That doesn't mean that it's true. Saying all Black men are violent, that's just a lazy attempt to try to justify a stat like that. So, I mean, that kind of goes with the picture. I mean, you've got the person, they're out there, they're not doing any work, they're not doing any research, they're just kind of outside looking in. Whereas if you are subjective, you know, you can kind of put yourself in someone else's perspective, you know, you can kind of see from their point of view, you know, you kind of doing the work a little bit, you know, putting in some effort, stuff like that.
And I don't know about the lazy part, because statisticians would be like, what are you talking about? We crunch numbers all day, every day. But I hear what you're trying to say for sure. Okay, anybody else would like to add to that?
I want to pick on Papa Lavi. He's been so quiet there, just observing us, thinking a lot.
I wanted to say something after Ike, but Jacob, with his comment, really stole my mind. I don't know. With regard to your question, I think the guy who is inside there on the subjective side would easily find himself tampering with the data or the information that to be collected. He needs to collect. What we call bias or personal equation can be mixed up with the information that they are investigating. There's also a good part of it, the fact that he will be getting more raw data or information compared to the independent observer who is seeing only from far. That's what I wanted to say. Of course, some of the ideas just flew.
Those are the answers I was actually looking for. In that, of course, that person that is inside, there's a risk that they come and bring in their biases, and that could potentially impact the results, and that in turn could impact the intervention, policies, etc. And so steps, as I mean, I don't want to go into too much depth here, but steps need to be taken by researchers to sort of try and minimize that bias. But when doing qualitative and that sort of subjective type of research, it is very difficult to eliminate that bias completely. And there's some perspective that bias is actually good for the research, in the sense that if you, in that there is, I had a conversation with someone the other day, and she was saying that there is a lot of hesitancy in collecting racialized data, because of the fear that it could get into the wrong hands and be interpreted like view one. And so her argument is that racialized data should be collected, developed, analyzed by racialized people who do bring that bias. In that, does that make sense? Yeah. But definitely, Lavi, that's a good point, and that's one of the things I was looking for sure. Yeah.
Maybe
Exactly.
Papa Ndembe, we haven't heard from you either.
Rita rightly said that your positionality is part of your bias, and it's something that you just kind of get away from. Whilst we may take measures as researchers to minimize it, but you cannot eliminate it, and it could actually be a good thing for you to have some of these biases coming to the fore.
It's good to have some bias, and it's good to, you know, get some truth, but I don't know if I really want anything affecting what the actual story is, even if it is someone who is subjective. I mean, it's good to definitely have someone who's definitely living in the situations, and definitely, but I don't know if it's such a good idea to get the point of, especially if you're talking about like a news article or something, to have their own personal bias, maybe on their own Facebook page or something, no problem there, you know, have your own opinion. But it doesn't seem like a good idea to me, in my point of view, to have personal bias in the media, whatever your race is. That just doesn't sound like you're getting the truth out there.
That's a perspective too. That's a much valid perspective. Absolutely. That is a much valid perspective that a lot of people do hold. And I think the challenge that, let's say, people of color face is that there is a fear that, for me personally anyway, my fear is that, like I say, if this sort of data gets into the hands of the wrong person, this is the view that will be put out into the world, or something like that. You know, Black men are violent, for example. And if that happens, the recommendations are going to be, what could recommendations be in the prison system? If there is that research that comes out and says Black prisoners are violent, what could be the implications in the prison system in terms of reform?
I see Afo got his hand up.
Afo, yeah.
Actually, I had it off. I want to like respond to a thing that Jake was saying earlier, because on the subject of like not wanting biases in like the research you're doing, one thing, I was just taking a class last semester. It was called Philosophy of Science, and one thing we were talking about a lot is that in all the science we do till today, there is always bias. We have never had a time we're doing science and it was completely subjective, unbiased. Like we can, like, I think the biggest thing we always came back to in that class was looking at the scientific revolution. When Copernicus was trying to tell us that the sun was not revolving around the earth, but it was actually the earth revolving around the sun. The church wasn't having none of that. Like, no, it's going against of what we know. We have our biases. So like when we're trying to do astronomy, physics, and everything, we're trying to adjust our theories to what we knew at the time. So it's like, you're always gonna have that bias. Absolutely. And like, of course, to a degree, like, yeah, you always gotta try to like make sure you're like you need to have biases, but also be open as well. Have a certain openness as well to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I never thought of that.
Till now, like even now, like we have the way we view science. It's still biased. Absolutely. It is.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So it's like it's going to be like that, and that's why I think, for these issues, we need to have our own biases when it comes to like racial issues itself, because we're going into a biased system.
All right.
The system already is biased, and we're going to be going into this bias and need to bring other biases within it.
Correct. Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. I have a lot to cover, but yeah, thank you, Afo. That was awesome. So let's say, in terms of my question, which is, how would this impact recommendations, interventions, and policies, let's say, within the prison system? So it could be strengthening of the powers of guards. It could result in more brutality, because if there's that belief and understanding that, okay, Black prisoners are violent, then it's going to mean, well, we need to toughen up our security. We need to toughen up the guards. We need to this, we need to train them in more combative strategies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just going to actually be self-prophesying, you know what I mean? And so if it's a police system, how may that impact policy? Similar thing. It could be, let's say, an increase in strengthening in the powers of guards and police, etc., more brutality, more funding and allowance of brutal measures, less tolerance of Black people. And so you see how the type of your worldview, the method that you use, etc., impacts not only the tiny research that you're doing, but it could also influence change. And if we look at view 2, it's important to look at here is looking at the causes and not just a symptom of the issue. Violence may be the symptom of a wider problem. Just like, let's say, violent outbursts may be a symptom of autism at a certain point of the autistic spectrum. It doesn't mean that people with autism are inherently violent. View 2, may be interested in speaking with them, understanding the experiences through interviews, focus groups, etc., understand the root of the problem. That's qualitative. Here, how might this manifest? What could policy change look like if you're looking at things from that perspective?
From which perspective, sorry?
From that perspective where you're not just looking at that proving that Black men are violent, but you're wanting to look at the many reasons. Is it racism? Is it mental health? Is it poverty? Is it inequality? Is it the socioeconomic inequalities and that sort of thing? What could reform look like? How could that be different?
I think for me, I'm going to bring a quick Calgary example here to show maybe how things could change there. Because I think the first example you mentioned is interesting. I've seen it happen. Or I was thinking about an example I shared with the group before when I was working at the movie theater, and back then it was like really like anti-rap sentiment in Calgary. Like if you were a Black guy, oh, you want to be a rapper, and people thought a lot of stuff about rappers before they see you too. I'm sure La Vie walking in Calgary, somebody say, hey, you have weed, somebody tries to buy weed off it. Those are the kind of things we see. But when I was working at that movie theater, every time like the movie like Tupac Resurrection came out or those things, there'd be a lot of security right there. And then there'd be a meeting beforehand to say, okay, this movie's coming out. We got to make sure that we have the right people in place to do this kind of stuff. But it ended up becoming something that even the Black people who worked there, we like, this is weird. Like, why, why are we getting security for a movie? And then it got to the point where Tupac Resurrection came out first, not to get to your other point 2. There was another movie that came out that won the awards. It's the Hustle and Flow. Remember the one where Terrence Howard is in it? There was that song that won the Oscars. Now for that movie, because it was winning in the awards, they had to like put it in. And so the thing what they did with Hustle and Flow, they only put it in for one weekend. And then the reform that they ended up saying was, oh, we don't have a big enough population to support this. It's not like, oh, we're not for rap anymore. But like that was the reform. I know it's not like the like big win that you are looking to see, but it's like when people had to stop looking at things from such an outsider perspective, when it was a movie getting attention within the society at large, they found different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, thank you for that example. I mean, if we're to look at, it's interesting that, like I say, sorry. But thank you, Ike. That's a really good, really good example. I mean, if you were to, let's say, go back to the example that I gave here, if you have a researcher that is looking at taking that qualitative approach and they're looking at the myriad of reasons, and they're really going into that fish tank, really going into the prisons to talk to them, speak to families, better understand the experiences, that could result in things like better mental health access in prisons. It could be a change in culture where they see these people as humans and not just as a bunch of violent people. You know, could work towards systems change, and you could also work towards reducing unemployment, reduce in low income areas, because a lot of these crimes are as a result of poverty, inequality, mental health challenges. And so if you really deep delve into these core issues, then you're actually going to be looking at reform and policy change, etc., that goes beyond the prison cells. And so it could be useful for both the individuals within the prison cells, as well as the system within the prison, as well as the broader community, looking at really the core issues as to why these things are, why there is this overrepresentation of Black people in the prison system. But let's move on. Where am I? Yeah, so if we just do a quick overview. So one, we started off with, what is truth? The first view is Black men are violent. The second view is Black men are not a monolithic lump. And so there could be many reasons as to why they are overrepresented in the prison system. Worldview or perspective could be for the first person is Black people. I see Black people in handcuffs all the time, and they're overrepresented in TV shows, and they're being called super predators on the TV. And I don't have any Black friends. I don't have any Black friends or Black relationships. And then view two is like, well, actually, I'm a Black person. Family members are entrepreneurs, academics, social workers, and they're doing well, and they have no idea what a prison cell looks like. So this overrepresentation for me makes no sense. And so the relationship with the research for this researcher for view one will be objective because they're on the outside looking in. For view two, it's subjective, and they're coming in with their biases. And the research methods, like Afo correctly said, quantitative would be appropriate for view one and qualitative for view two. And essentially what I'm demonstrating here is that what you think truth is, your worldview, your identity, your relationship with research, they all play an important part in how you approach and conduct research, how you're going to collect the data, how you analyze the data, and ultimately, that's going to impact the results of the data, and the results impact what sort of social change is pursued to address the issues and challenges that is being studied. And so researcher positionality is really all about being, it's about, you know, for this context would be about immersing yourself in the research, especially when it comes to social research. Some people will employ both qualitative and quantitative, like I think Afo and I think Lavie suggested. And it's really challenging to get to the root causes, depth, you know, understand people's experiences without qualitative research, without getting into that fish tank. And you're probably wondering, well, why is this relevant for me? We don't care. Well, apart from all the issues, all the things we've just spoken about, as young Black people, importance of research in bringing about social change. And it's important that you understand your positionality in influencing research approach, methods, analysis, and ultimately the results. And it's important that you see how you can use the tools that you've developed and learnings from previous sessions on cultural capital, empowerment, to address and or mitigate and be able to navigate through the system. And also, it's important to, as we're going to be going into, you're going to be asked to do a research project, okay? And one of the issues discussed throughout these many sessions that we've had, you know, you do research into it, you explore the learnings, understand the issue, how you'll use the concepts and the ideas from cultural capital, empowerment, and even from today's session and future sessions to address and or minimize the impact of a particular topic that you choose to explore. So we'll go into that later if we have time, but I just wanted you to sort of understand the importance of research, understanding research and positionality, understanding what is truth, what your worldview is, what method you're going to be exploring or employing, and really understanding how they're all connected. So let's move on quickly. Any questions before I move on? Okay, so now we've done the sort of high level philosophical stuff. Now we're coming down to planet Earth again. And so before you get started in any research, you have to have a good research question. And well-informed questions are key to good research. And I have come up with like 5 key things that is important when writing a research question. So first of all, you have to state the goal. What is it that you want? You can start with using a verb. You want to characterize, you want to describe, you want to explore, you want to understand, you want to explain. What is your topic of interest? Is it mental health? Is it racism? Is it, what else have we done? Is it about employment? Is it about success? Is it about mentorship? Is it about business? Is it about financial empowerment? Use neutral or non-directional language as best as you possibly can. And then define the sample and setting and be precise. Now let's look at some examples. So you could say that the aim of the research is to understand interpersonal systems level factors relevant to delivering healthcare to emergency department patients who are homeless. See, we began with a verb, to understand. And then name the topic. Here you're looking at which boundaries, here we're looking at which boundaries you're looking at. And here we're looking at interpersonal systems level factors relevant to delivering healthcare. And then patient population and setting. You're looking at patients who are homeless. And so you can see that this is a formula that I use. I find it methodical, and it allows me to sort of check. And so let's look at another one. And then you tell me what's the verb. So this one is to explore the challenges Black people face in securing a successful career in the 21st century and make recommendations to address and or mitigate these challenges. Okay. And so what's the verb here?
Explore.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the topic?
Challenges Black people face in securing a successful career in the 21st century.
Yeah, and what's the population? You can feel free to repeat it. What's the population?
Black people.
Setting?
21st century.
Is it precise?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Would you say it's leading somewhat?
I thought it would a little bit, a teensy little, yeah.
Yes, I agree, absolutely. Which is why I say try your best. Yes, but yeah, so there you go. I think from these two, and I will share these with you so that when you're coming up with your topics, etc., you can use this as a guide. And so, yeah, okay. So let's just do a quick recap. So state the goal using a verb. So it could be characterize, describe, explore, understand, examine. And then you look at what is a topic of interest. Use neutral or non-directional language as best as you possibly can. Define the sample and the setting and be as precise as you possibly can. Okay. Okay. And remember here, these are qualitative and quantitative attributes. And I think we're going to focus for your research. I think we should focus on qualitative. But of course, if you have some interesting data that you want to crunch away. We welcome it and you can present it. And yes, but we're going to focus on qualitative. Remember, we said it's based on opinions and experiences. It's a smaller sample. Here it could be interviews, focus groups, in-depth analysis, and open-ended questions. And so based on that, what would you say are the qualitative data collection methods? How do you collect data for qualitative research?
Interviews.
Google.
Yes, correct. You could, elaborate. What do you mean by Google?
I would use Google.
I expected that. Okay. I think Ike said something a second ago.
Yeah, I said interviews for quality.
Yes. Yeah. Anybody else? Thank you, Ike.
Julie has her hand up. Go ahead.
Julie?
I would say doing meetings and so same thing as the interview, I guess. And just talking to them about their experience. Yeah,
absolutely. Anybody heard of focus groups? Yeah. What's a focus group? Okay, no worries. I have it here for you. So yeah, options, interviews. So they explore individual experiences and perceptions in rich detail. Focus groups, generates unique insights into shared experiences and social norms. So focus groups was why you could have, I think, between 6 to 8 people in a room, and it has pros and its cons. If you have experience in doing focus groups, take it away. Or if you want to even do research on how to do focus groups, feel free to do that. But we're not expecting anything beyond, let's say, interviews. But of course, if you want to impress us, go ahead. We'll be impressed anyway. And then observation. Here, you can learn about behaviors and interactions in natural settings, study cultural aspects of the setting or particular context. I go back to that fish tank where you had the diver in there, really sort of learning about behaviors and interactions, and you can see how the fish or the shark or whatever is moving and when and how many and how long and that sort of thing. And so, and of course, documentary research as well. So documents, but we'll go into that in a little while. And so when looking at interviews, what would you say is important for us to be aware of when conducting interviews?
Not asking leading questions, for instance.
Correct. Yes. Not asking leading questions. Carol, do you have an example of a leading question?
Leading question. I don't have one at the top of my head. Let me think. Oh, if you say something like, it's not a great example, but something to the effect like, you would, this experience that you just witnessed, you would say that it's racist, right?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and let me see, what else could be a leading question? So something like, yeah, it's escaped my mind too. I had a few examples. Mind. Can anybody else think of any sort of leading questions? And it's important for us to just have a quick discussion about them so we know what to avoid when doing our research.
I would say like asking a question and then kind of confirming it with them instead of like asking them what they think. So trying to find a way, like kind of changing the actual person's response by kind of, being like, I guess you can ask them like a good example, not a good example, but if you just ask someone like, you like vanilla ice cream, right?
Right.
And it's like, they're gonna be like, yeah, I like that. Like, why not?
What would be a better question to ask?
Is what kind of ice cream do you prefer?
Yeah. Thank you. Exactly. Someone else?
Things like how much racism have you experienced? Oh, I'm so sorry. Go before me. Who was there talking? Was that Ashley?
It's just me. Yeah. I was just gonna say, like, as in social work, like, I have to interview kids a lot, and I'm interviewing them for like abusive, and they really hammer like not to leading questions can be so misleading in terms of the answers, especially when dealing with kids. But another example of a leading question is just like, so basically putting all the words in their mouth first, right? So this is what happens when this happens, instead of just asking them what happens when, you know, just tell me what happens. That's the thing they always tell us. Tell me what you, and then you give the whole answer, and you don't put any options for them to choose.
Yeah, absolutely. And working with kids is also crucially important, because then you can go into a whole heap of ethical issues when obviously working and interviewing with kids and research. Yeah. And one more example of a leading question and how we can.
I was gonna say things like, would you say the police is mean or racist? Or like, how much racism have you experienced? Just kind of, I'm just riffing off Ashley, just putting everything there for them without letting them tell their own story.
Yes. Would you say the police is racist? Yes, absolutely. That is a totally leading question. How could you turn that around, Ike?
What have been your experiences with the police?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So do you see how, like, so I think these questions are really good. So if you were to say to someone, do you think the police are racist? First of all, that's a closed-ended question, yes or no. As a Black person, I'm likely going to say yes. However, if you were to ask me, what has been your experience with the police? Then I'll be like, nothing. I've never been pulled over in my life. And so that leads into a different type of data that is being collected.
So would it be kind of coming up with like kind of keywords and then trying to avoid those keywords best as possible kind of thing? Like, I know we brought up racism, kind of like police, kind of, you know, kind of take those words, avoid using their race, avoid using stuff like that, and kind of just focus on the main question.
It's difficult. It's a very good question, because it's difficult to talk about racism without mentioning racism. But one thing that I would caution against is giving them the answer. Do you think the police is racist? That's giving them the answer. And whatever you do, don't ask closed questions, because closed question gives you a yes or no answer. Give them the opportunity to be able to expand, if that makes sense. Is that helpful, Jacob?
So is it more like avoiding yes or no questions kind of idea? Just as a basic level, like you kind of want to keep the discussion going. So from what I understand, it's kind of trying to avoid like, do you feel this way, yes or no, or more so getting them to tell you what they, more of that approach.
Correct. I like that. So it's not a case of do you feel, it's tell me what do you feel, or how do you feel, when did you feel it, if that makes sense. So the what's, the why, the when, the how's type of questions.
Right.
Well, maybe not even what. Well, yeah, it could be what is your experience? That could be. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good question. And so in terms of things to think about when doing interviews, so it's important to build a good rapport, open questions, no complex questions. Questions, I would say, no longer than one sentence, because if it becomes one sentence, two sentences, then people start thinking, which part of the sentence do I focus on or do I not focus on? So make it simple. And typically you have either a schedule of questions or a schedule of topics that you would like to cover, because it's absolutely normal, or it's not unusual for you to ask a particular question and the participant goes off on a tangent, and you need to be able to sort of coax them back in, because you have your schedule of questions that you would like to go through, or your schedule of topics that you would like to cover. Okay, so it's not unusual for them to go off on a tangent and for you to think, that's not what I asked. And so, because sometimes if people don't know the answer, they just give you a response about what they know. That's not unusual. But if they find them going off on a tangent, you bring them back in little by little. You have to be open to emerging issues, avenues, and themes, in that you may be thinking in a very linear fashion, A, B, and C, whereas they will be like 8.1, 8.2, and I don't know what 8.1 or 8.2 is, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. They will come with new ideas and new thoughts that perhaps you had never considered, and new perspectives and new research, and they would, so be open to emerging issues, avenues, and themes. It's sort of like an hourglass style of questioning. What do you think I mean by that? What do I mean by that?
Would it be just kind of like a quick answer, quick question, like an hourglass? You only have a set amount of time, so it's kind of like, here's the question, we tip it over, and by the time all the sand's fallen, it's kind of like the question's over. There's no need to ramble or rant or anything kind of idea.
I love the way you think, because I never thought about it that way, but I totally love it, because it makes perfect sense. That's how an hourglass works. So that is how it works. What I had thought about initially, and now you're making me feel stupid, because that makes complete sense what you've just said. You start with kind of like the general, your name, your age, occupation, how do you feel about this, and blah blah blah. It's sort of generalized sort of thing, more personal, and then you get more personal and detailed, about specific questions and things that you really want to know about, and then you widen out again, before you close the interview. So also it's important, let them know what the next step of the research is, when or if they will hear from you again. It's unfortunate, but a lot of researchers conduct interviews and you never hear from them again. And you're like, whatever happened to that thing that you did, or that thing that you were doing? So it's important that whomever you speak to, you not only tell them what the plan is, but you have a plan to get, to sort of tell them what your findings were and that sort of thing. Yes. Avoid leading questions and conveying your view. So I know we say the biases exist. Your biases are going to come out anyway, but try not to convey your view, because that may bias the participants' responses. Keep track of topics that are actually mentioned. So it's advised, and it's not clear cut, because when I first started doing interviews, I would record them and I'd write notes and I'd come back to it and I'd have no idea what I wrote. So it's a good thing to have them recorded if they will permit it. And other people are just extremely good at writing notes. But keep track of topics when they're mentioned. If you want any sort of support whilst doing this from either myself or Rita or anybody else from SOS Congo, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to sort of guide you in the development of your research questions and that sort of thing. And then you have to be aware of power dynamics. So whilst that may or may not be the case in this research, but if, let's say, someone is working with, let's say, vulnerable population, that power dynamic is going to sort of exist. And so you have to work hard to try and flatten that power dynamic so that the participant doesn't feel less than. Okay. And then, of course, when you're conducting an interview, now the streets are open again. So you can do face-to-face, telephone, FaceTime, Skype. When you questions can be like, why did the organization introduce this project for migrants? Probing questions are important, because like I say, people like to go off on a tangent. And so it's good to ask probing questions. Sometimes someone might explain, but you need more depth. So you'll ask probing questions. So could you say a little bit more about this? Specific and close questions, avoid. Length of interview, no more than an hour. You can ask for it to be audio recorded or to take notes. And what do you see as challenges when conducting an interview? I may have mentioned some already.
I feel like for me, just because I'm a bit of a hothead, not arguing with them if we disagree on something. Like if we disagreed, I wouldn't want to be like that guy that like gets back snappy or like, you know, whatever. So just keeping my composure, keeping cool.
Correct. 100%. It's merely a data gathering exercise, as opposed to, of course, you're going to be discussing and chatting, but it's more of a data gathering. Rather, remember earlier I said you don't want to necessarily convey your view, because in conveying your view, that's a good point in that one, you may bias them, but two, you may end up in an altercation, and you don't want to do that with a participant because you may cause harm, and that's not good when conducting research. That's a good observation there, Jacob. So thank you. Yeah, what else could be a challenge?
A participant not being forthcoming.
Yes, participant may not. Sorry, Carol. Sorry.
I was just going to say, not being forthcoming or wanting to answer certain questions, not wanting to elaborate on information that they have.
Yeah. So participants may not be very forthcoming. And in that case, you will need to employ more probes and more open-ended questions. And it's also okay to accept some silence, because sometimes it takes people a little longer to think and process. And sometimes people who are awkward with silences will just sort of jump in and disrupt the participant's train of thought. So be okay with the awkward silences. And if you're okay with it, eventually they will say something. And yes, and then you need to employ probes and open-ended questions, and they just might not be forthcoming, but those are some ways that you can address that. Thank you, Carol. That's a good one. Anybody else? Last one. Okay, so you may have a participant who doesn't want to be taped. This is a participant's right. Never force them to be taped or tape them secretly. You can also offer the participant to choose at the end of the interview whether to keep the tape, because I've had instances where someone's like, sure, record me, I don't care. And then they kind of say things that they're like at the end, like, oh crap, I should not have said that. And then they would specifically say, take that piece out or scrap the interview completely. And if they make that request, you have to abide by that. Participants may talk too much. That's a blessing and a curse. You know, you may try to impose some structure earlier on, you know, use some close questions to begin with. What's your name? What's your age? And that sort of thing. But focus on the most important questions and find a way to tactfully interrupt when necessary, but be careful not to transcribe seemingly boring, lengthy interviews. So be careful about that. And like Carol said, they may not be talkative enough. So you'll need more probes, more open-ended questions, and you need to accept some silence. And participants can be hostile. And so ask if they want to put it off to another time, or if they would prefer not to be interviewed at all. Don't get into an altercation with the participant. And yeah, so here is sort of like a format, I guess. So thanks for accessing or meeting with me. Which organization or who are you representing? You might be representing yourself. Research purpose and the nature of the research outputs. How was a respondent selected? You can tell them, well, you were selected because you have experience in this, that, and the other. Guarantee, explain confidentiality and anonymity. We don't want any names. We don't want to hear about names and things like that. You have to ensure confidentiality and anonymity. Tell them that they have the right not to answer, that they can stop the interview at any time. And you can, it's up to you how formal you want to do it. But in academic style, we would offer, let's say, written documentation to the interviewee. You could also offer your contact details, because they may have explained something and later on they'll be like, actually, I forgot something. Let me give you a quick call and explain something else. So offer your contact details. Time of the interview, try not to go over it. You can ask if recording is okay. At the end, you can also ask them any questions. In terms of probes, silent. You can, nod slowly, tilt your head, okay, to show that you're there and you're listening. Echo, so repeat the last statement and ask the respondent to continue. So, well, you just spoke about so and so. Can you tell me more about that? It can be neutral or you're encouraging. Oh, I see. Okay. Tell me more. Very common. Imply you already know something or encourage respondent to speak up. You may ask questions, like more questions around who. Let's say someone's talking about, I had experience with this as well. Who was it with and where was it and what did you do and when did you do it and how did you do it? And clarifying. So you said X, please explain or describe what you meant by that. So these are examples of probes if you are either not getting the answers that you want, or you have a quiet person, or you just want more detail. Could be like, it's so juicy, you're like, I want to know more, okay? And credible sources of information. So just give me 5 more minutes. Is that okay, people? Ike, is that all right? I'm almost to the end.
Yeah, just a quick, the babies are screaming upstairs, so I'm gonna have to head out soon too.
Sure. It will just be 5 minutes. I'm literally at the end. So can you give me, thank you, Ike, can you give me some examples of some credible sources of information for research? What is credible? What is
scholarly articles?
Yeah, scholarly articles. Yep. For the benefit of everybody else, what are scholarly articles?
So articles
that are peer reviewed. Oh, sorry.
Yes, carry on. Articles that are peer reviewed. Yep. So that means articles that have been, could be articles, papers, conference papers, books that have been peer reviewed by other scholarly professionals or something like that, who are deemed to either be experts in the field or at the very least knowledgeable in the field. So yes, absolutely. Thank you. What else?
Just a note, Wikipedia is not scholarly.
Sorry, Carol?
So just note, Wikipedia is not scholarly.
Correct. Yeah. So credible sources are really written by authors respected in their fields of study, or people who have lived experiences, and they are responsible, credible authors. Responsible, credible authors will cite their sources so that you can check the accuracy of and support what they've written. So examples of not so credible sources of information for research. So I think Carol just said Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is a no-no. Yes, what else? What else is not credible?
YouTube videos?
It depends. It depends on who's making them.
Okay.
Because
TikTok?
it could be a professor who is doing the YouTube video. It could be somebody with lived experiences doing a YouTube video. And so it depends on who is making them. But that's really good point. And so you have to then look at who the author is. If it's someone that's just given an opinion piece, there's no lived experience, no sort of background, and they're just given an opinion piece just because, that's maybe deemed not so credible. Someone said something just now, I just missed it. What was it?
I definitely heard something too, yeah.
Yeah, it was Jacob said TikTok.
TikTok.
Oh,
again,
sorry. Yeah, that was me. I said TikTok. That's my bad.
It depends on who the author is, because you have professors now and people with lived experiences who are trying to gain a lot of followers and spread their message worldwide. And so, but then I would check the author, check what they've done, look into, you don't have to go into that much depth, but we'll go into some credible sources shortly. What about some credible ones? So we've spoken about scholarly articles. What else?
Books.
By whom? Everybody's writing books these days.
I think I guess you need like a proper textbook, stuff like that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Surveys?
Ooh. Sorry, what'd you say, Ike?
I said surveys.
Yeah, surveys could be good, but also good to look at who's the creator of the survey. If it's a reputable person or organization for documents, so peer-reviewed scholarly journals, conference papers, and books, i.e. JSTOR. You can look at JSTOR. I'm not sure how much access everybody has, but I think some articles are free. Science Direct. I think Google Scholar as well can be used. Websites generally ending in .gov or .edu, because that implies it's a government website or maybe some academic institution. Media, Calgary Herald, maybe, the Globe and Mail, and then, depending on what the issue is, if it's a finance related issue, Financial Times, Economist, and anybody else. What else is credible in terms of documents?
Documents specifically, or just any source?
Yeah, let's say any source.
Because I mean, I'd say just people. You've been mentioning, people with lived experiences. So I think obviously those people also be credible for.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ashley. Yeah. So in terms of like people, it would be people with lived experiences, people who are experts in their fields or experts on particular experiences. And so these are the items that I would say are deemed credible. And so draw on these for whatever research project that you have. And if you're not sure about a particular source, send me a text, send me an email. Hey, is this credible? I'll be like, yay or nay. We don't need to, I don't need to go into an explanation. But yeah, and so, and I would advise, I mean, unless you're someone like Ashley who has Miss Fogo in her family, who was like fantastic and wonderful. But I would advise, let's say, against, let's say, friends and family, unless they fit this criteria, who, people with lived experience or they're considered to be experts in their field. Okay. Any questions? Okay. 2 slides and then we can go. How to present your reports or on your findings. So one is good to have, start off with an intro, what you did, why you did it, and how. Talk about the background of whatever issue. It's mental health. What's going on with mental health in Calgary, in Alberta, in Canada, worldwide? What's a particular issue facing Black people? Is it an issue with access? Is it an issue with quality? That sort of thing. And then what is the key aims and objectives of the research? So here you can draw on that 5 check-in point that I did with respect to research questions. Research method, what are you gonna employ? Is it interviews? Why are you using interviews? Is it focus groups? Why are you using focus groups? Then you talk about your findings. What did you find? What were the most important things? And recommendations. So based on your findings, what are your recommendations? I want to see recommendations at the individual level, recommendations, let's say for government. If you want to go into, you can take it anywhere you want to go. It can be recommendations at the individual level, recommendations for nonprofit, recommendation for business, recommendations for policymakers at the city level, the provincial, take it as far as you would like. But yeah, recommendations based on your research. Summary and learnings from the research, conclusion, and also what questions remain outstanding. One thing I found at the end of my PhD is I know nothing. At the end of like 4 years, I'm like, I still know nothing. So it's likely that at the end of your research, you're going to be like, there's still a lot that I would like to learn. And so what questions remain outstanding for you? And in terms of tips, use visuals, tell a story, include quotes of participants, of course, ensuring anonymity, make presentation visually appealing and engaging, and ask others to critique your presentation before you actually present it. And then start thinking of your groups. It looks like we might be groups of, well, we'll see how many people. Ike and Ashley, can I leave this in your capable hands to sort of determine the number of groups that we'll have?
Absolutely. We're going to just work on, we've been talking to everybody already. So there were 8 missing today, total 8 youth, all working different things there. So once we get on a good schedule again with everybody back on the same base, I think all but maybe one should be coming back. There's
Okay.
one maybe, but everybody else should be coming back, and we're taking care of it.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So think about who you want to work with on this project. You know, how can you use the learnings from the sessions on cultural capital, empowerment, poverty to advocate for yourself and community, and or let's address racism or navigate through the system. Basically, what are the learnings? What are the issues or recommendations you'd like to make, and draw on capital, cultural capital, draw on empowerment, draw on poverty, draw on the session today to obviously put together your research. And we're anticipating a presentation date for the 5th of August. If it changes, we'll let you know. But this is it. Thank you very much for listening.
All right, round of applause for everybody, all of us. We made it through. Thank you, Nketi. Nketi powered all the way through here till the end. Definitely much appreciated. So for everyone who we haven't seen in a while, welcome. You guys are going to be hearing more from me coming up in the next couple of weeks. I got a couple of weeks off, so I'm going to be hollering at you guys there. But yeah, let's try to get energy back. We made it to summer, so that's really good. And then maybe we'll take a off week somewhere here, get our energy back, and then get back into the swing of things. Does that sound good?
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jolie. And yeah, thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your week. Papa Ndembe, enjoy your evening, sir. Thank you. Bye.
All right. See you guys.
Thank you.